All right, and we are recording. All right, Mr. Boobles, kick us off, man.
All right, so this week we've got Maneesh Subherwal. Maneesh used to work with Jeff and I when we were all consultants or employees or kind of working together at an organization to help institute change. And it's been a while since we've connected. So just Maneesh, why don't you just for the listeners give them a little background on your journey, where you're coming from, from ThoughtWorks to McKinsey to where you are today.
So Jeff and Jeff, thank you both for having me on. Really appreciate it. It really has been a while since we've connected, so I'm glad, given the world we live in, that we are connecting in this way, as I do at work as well these days. So I'm Maneesh Subherwal. I've been in consulting for about 17 years. Background is spent 12, 13 years at ThoughtWorks, which is an Agile consultancy. Learned a lot there, just from the Agile manifesto to development to Agile delivery to really doing it and doing it the right way and teaching it and also learning a ton along the way. In '06, I helped McKinsey go Agile, helped them with their on their Agile journey, and at the same time took them on that journey within technology that now has become a pretty fundamental way of how McKinsey runs its own consulting business, squads, tribes, all of that across the board. I joined McKinsey after 5 years in the UK. So I was with ThoughtWorks in the UK, where I was the UK MD. Ran that business for 5 years and did some great work there. And decided it was time to come back in 2017, which is where I joined McKinsey at that point. Really to help drive agility for large organizations and help them on their Agile journey to move from this project mindset to product orientation, even journey orientation as they went along. So super excited. I joined the East Coast business and really glad to have joined the firm. And now, given the last few years, and I've been on the road for many years, I just decided to take a step back about 9 months ago and wanted to do something that was still impactful, ambitious, and game-changing, and joined JPMorgan Chase in the commercial bank to help drive the commercial bank's business transformation, where you take the Agile fundamentals and bring design thinking to the board, in essence, and really drive a product orientation, journey orientation mindset for the commercial bank from the ground up. So it's a 5-year journey to drive that. And we're doing that in short bursts, short sprints, one environment, one segment, one capability, one persona at a time. So super, super excited to be on that journey with JPMorgan.
Cool. So you said this already, going from project to product, which I think is awesome. So how do you, and it sounds like you're taking an approach that Jeff and I often recommend, which is deep and narrow in an area. So it's not like, let's spread out across a whole large organization and just do a little bit of everything and just slowly make progress. Let's pick one area and get really good at it, and then figure out the next thing in that value stream and kind of build that out around that product holistically of what we actually deliver to customers. Is that kind of similar to what you're doing at JPMorgan?
Absolutely. I just build on that and say, I think we also want to go where the data tells us to go. There are often times where leaders tend to take us away, where they want to take a project to a product, to a journey-based mindset, where there isn't as much risk. The platform's not really there. The customers aren't really there. And what we did at JPMorgan over the last 6 months was spend time with the customers, really with the teams that are working with clients, as well as the clients themselves. Ask them what they wanted to see and what they wanted to actually do, what their journey would look like end to end, from a solution orientation to when they buy products, to actually working with those products, to offboarding products at some point as well, right? Mm-hmm. As they go through that entire cycle, what are the volumes that work for those clients? What are the segments of those volumes? And then at the same time, what are the errors we see within the team in the background? What are some of the handoffs that we see that we don't need to? Are there operating models changes? Are there talent changes? Are there training needs? So just looking at that holistic piece end to end, and then mm-hmm. stitching that journey and saying, okay, so what do we reinvented the customer experience from, 180 days from an initial conversation to them using a product to 20, to mm-hmm. 15, to 5 minutes. Like really think about it being quite disruptive to a point where you're not making micro inventions. You're really trying to move the needle on their entire end-to-end process. And what you actually find is customers are super interested in actually helping solve that with us. They've seen organizations, they've seen different products as well in their day-to-day too, and really want to bring that ethos to them.
So one of the first questions that I always get, and this is where I usually start with an engagement, is like, what is your product definition? So when you're having that conversation and you're saying where we're going to dive in, how do you answer that question? How do you start defining your product?
So what we did is in this construct, right? We looked at the entire commercial bank's products, and there are thousands of products, and essentially those products are. You actually hit on actually, Jeff. The products are what the organization tends to see, and how they run their essential work stream.
They're in the internal focus instead of external focus.
The internal external focus, and the spot on point, and that the board has realized as well, and also the leadership team is, let's actually think about the solutions that the client is looking for. Let's look at the strategic objectives the client's looking for, right? And then let's reorient the organization in the context of those, right? So let's say a client's looking to move from, they have payroll in one location and they're looking to expand payroll from the United States to the UK. They've just opened up a new segment. They just want to expand there, right? Are they really looking at expanding payroll? Are they looking at organic growth opportunity where they want to make sure that they can organically grow their organization, where payroll is one component? So that's the first conversation that's come up, right? The real strategic objective is I want to grow my organization from the US today and grow a new market in the UK, right? One of those myriad of components is payroll. That's probably what they're actually worried about today. But there are probably 18 other things that they should probably consider, which really makes that suite of products and that solution for that client. And so we're really like stepping back and saying, let's not think from a product perspective. Let's think about it in the context of the solution. What are like consulting, right? What are the product pieces they need? What are the services they need? Do they need training? Do they need analytics on the top of that? Are there other outlier components that would be helpful for them? And stitch that product experience end to end with that in mind.
Sure. So you're really starting with the problem in mind first. Like, what problem are we solving for our consumers? An external, consumer, not an internal one. And then let's build whatever we need from a product standpoint around them to help them solve that problem. Yeah. I love that because it's not just payroll. Payroll's the first step out of 18, like you said, and we should be able to bucket that into some kind of suite to sell to our customers to help them solve these problems.
And then building on that with the agile mindset as well, right? Let's take that strategic objective, and we've tested it with 5 clients. Let's actually build a hypothesis, play it out, and actually start to pilot it with some clients and see if that actually works before we go brass tacks and change everything end to end. And really go into that hypothesis-driven development of strategy end to end as well, which is something that I was really hoping for, right? When I made this move, is to bring strategy, design, and agile, right, and technology together to really come to that answer with a client first at the forefront of it and measure across the board as we go through it.
So can we take a quick step back? Just so you were talking about project to product mindset, but then you're also starting to talk about journey mindset. So you and I chatted briefly, almost about a year ago now, probably, about this. But can you elaborate on that? What do you mean by a journey mindset for those who might not be familiar with it?
So a lot of organizations tend to. I think first thing is there's a lot of great feedback around projects to products are the next step forward. Thinking about small projects and their own minutiae and their philosophy. Think beyond, because you can think about a product evolution end to end. You can help customers really evolve your product with you. You can actually think about a product and think about how a product can have its own life cycle in a myriad of everything else. And that's been a great movement over the last many years. I think this journey-based organization is really taking a step back and really thinking about it as a product is a point in time on a customer's journey, right? So if they look at if you look at a product in the front office, which is a sales product, for instance, right? That product and how you actually define that product, work through that product, that salesperson is probably thinking about the customer in the context of the sales function, but not in the context of the implementation of whatever was sold, how it was serviced, how it was actually sunset, how other products were recommended in the context of this product, right? And the journey orientation is really stepping back and thinking about your downstream and upstream customer pieces that need to really come together to get that customer thread end to end. So when you think about the sales process, the implementation process, the training process, the servicing process, right? And making sure that the entire customer experience, the perspective, the data that you have about the customer, the transparency that the customer has end to end is consistent and is thoughtful. And it gets to a point where you might not need to make a change on a front end aspect of a product because there might be recurring downstream effects, and getting that journey experience end to end really brings a lot of that to life. And that's where organizations are really moving away from the line of business approach to this journey approach, where you start to thread your customer experience instead of threading, a sales function or a recruitment function. You really have to think about, in this journey, let me just get this thin slice of the customer experience and really evolve it and build on it.
That's interesting because, like, when I talk about products, I talk about them like the way you just described journeys. And I do know what a lot of people do say, like, oh, we have a billing system. Can you help me with my billing product? And it's like, no, you're an insurance company. You don't have a billing product. You have a billing system that's part of a bigger product that you sell to your customers. Yeah. You actually sell life insurance. You actually sell auto insurance or whatever it is, group insurance, things like that. Those are your products. So, I get what you're saying. And so maybe the word journey is a nice word because it helps people think about it differently than maybe they are today.
I think there's a partnership approach as well around the journey, where you think about a product, then you're incentivized by the product. How do you incentivize, the organization around the journey is something I think it's not as easy because the models are so different from what they should be. You're incentivized with the customer in mind, but the word customer also changes in that construct because you've got internal partners that are now customers as well, and how you think about those customers end to end.
Right.
How have you both been dealing with that? The journey orientation, have you come across it? Have you actually dealt with it recently?
Yeah. Well, I'll let Jeff go.
Boobles. Go ahead, man.
So the recent clients I've been working with, we definitely talk about that. And many times they were brought up or slicing things by system. It was like, oh, we got the part over here that does accounting. We have the part over here that does billing. We have the part over here that does, X, Y, Z. And it's like, no, you sell this to your customers. That's the bigger thing. We should realign teams around that and really getting people aligned that are problem-solving people aligned around that holistic journey to what you sell to your customers. So an outside-in approach. And then you're looking at your code bases and saying, where do we have a lot of dependencies or we're going to be stepping on top of each other if we're not thinking holistically about what's best downstream from this code base or whatever. If there's a lot of shared APIs and people are stepping on each other and constantly breaking something for somebody else because guess what? There's a lot of legacy code out there, that's not, that doesn't use modern practices. So you have to take that into account as well. So those are all things that I've looked at with clients, and I usually go broader. I mean, I favor broader over narrow. Narrow, I think, really limits your business agility. So when I think about like agility from a standpoint of like what makes you more responsive and lets you work on the highest valuable stuff, it's the broader definition, because now I can say, hey, guess what? COVID-19 just hit. And, if I'm Microsoft, Teams is really important and we should move multiple teams to be working on Teams right now because that's so important right now. We need to keep up with Zoom. Zoom's kicking our butt, and you can do that really easily when you were aligned like with a big product base. But if you said, nope, we have our access team over here and they need to keep working on access and that's all they do, then that's a little different scenario, right? Like you don't have a lot of enough business agility at that point to change directions based off of, external factors.
Yeah. So my experience with this, in fact, I articulate this with we were talking previously. We started recording, in particular with the Scrum Master and Product Owner classes. I think of a journey as a brother or sister to thin slicing, and needing to understand. So the scenario I always walk through with students is let's pretend we're Amazon, and we want to make a new checkout system on the site. And so we've got a product listing page. All the products are listed. We've got a product detail page that displays all the information. We have the cart page because we can add a product to our shopping cart. We've got the checkout page, and then we've got the payment page and the confirmation page. And maybe each one of those things winds up as a product backlog item that we're going to have a team do. So first they do the listing page, then the detail page, then the checkout page, then they get to the cart page, and then, you ran out of funding. What did you just build for your customer? You made them a super awesome website that they can look at products.
Yeah.
What value did you deliver to the organization? What value did you deliver to the customer? Nothing. All you did was tease them with really cool products that they can't buy. So in order for that journey to make sense, you've got to make it all the way to the end. You've got to get it to the point of sale that, in other words, they can exchange a fistful of dollars for your product or service that you're selling them, right? That's the point of that journey, is you have to make it all the way through for value to actually be delivered and realized for the organization. So when I talk about the journey, it's understanding the different areas of a product that they're going to be interacting with. It does you no good, if we're selling travel insurance, it does us, well, some good to sell the product. But what happens when they have to file a claim and we haven't built anything for them to file a claim, or we haven't built any system to submit the payment back out to them, or whatever the case may be? We still have to keep in mind all the journeys that our customer is going through, and making sure that we're still providing thin slices of value, right? We may not be able to process all of the different payments right now, but we've got to get something into that journey for them.
I really like the thin slice analogy, because at the end of the day, it's a really nice way to really talk through value. And value, and in many organizations, was project completion and before, right? And then we'll put a team together, finish up the project, and allocate those people elsewhere. Then you move to this product completion and product evolution, and until the product was funded or not. But the journey orientation of the thin slicing all the way to value, leading value and lagging value, is something I think that organizations are still wrestling with. They're still trying to figure out, like, how do you actually drive those definitions end to end? What are those KPIs as you work through them?
Mm-hmm. And I know you're passionate about OKRs. So, like, how are you using OKRs to define value with teams you're working with?
Yeah, I'll come back to OKRs in a second. But one thing I actually wanted to talk about, which I found really inspiring recently, in light of the world we live in today, is the SBA and the Paycheck Protection Program. The Paycheck Protection Program is something that just went out recently, and in the context of value, it was very clear what the value needed to be. These small businesses needed to be able to fund their paychecks, right, and make sure that people were paid in the context of the environment we live in, and paid quickly, and were not required to go through all the pain that they generally have to when they look for bank support. And lots of banks, JPMorgan included, but lots of banks came together, and in a matter of weeks, they really went to this agile mindset of what's the journey of a small business, what are they facing right now, what's our day one answer to really get this money into their hands, right? And they had this initial funding that was approved really quickly, to a point where they learned from it over a 4-week time frame. Things have been moving really fast, and in that sense, it was truly agile in spirit. In the background, teams really came together. So all these teams, multifunctional, cross-functional teams, came together. We had people who understood the problem, built it out, validated it, serviced it, proved it out end to end, and were also advising the government at the same time. That, to me, is really that journey value coming to life, where they went to a day one, tested it, validated it, went to a day two as well, and are continuously expanding the program as you see it, which has been really, really fascinating.
And the
that to me
requirements have
is
been
real
I was going to say the requirements are constantly changing, right? So like whether you pretty much have to be agile for the payment protection stuff at this point, right? Like
requirements are changing, in the context of it was initially like 12 to 18 weeks. They've extended the timeline for, when you have to actually pay and fund this. There's also some money left aside for the next version or next phase of it. So it's fascinating and it's incredible. But I just thought it's been an inspiring thing to see it behind the scenes as well. And the teams stopped their work on their current, point, whatever they had to do at that point in time, stepped back, went and solved that problem, thought about it from a customer point of view, set up a hypothesis, proved it out, and it was just fascinating. Sorry, Jeff.
No, you actually just went into what I was going to ask. I was curious. I don't want to say tactically, but a little bit more detail of what that looked like for your team. So all of a sudden, this giant initiative comes rolling down the pipe at JPMorgan. So how did that, in a very short time frame, get distilled into things the teams could tactically start trying to tackle? Right? Like, how did it go from government is, I think it was the Payment Protection Act, and then the SAFE, I think it was the other one. How did it go from that to teams working on it? Like, what did that journey look like?
I think it was a few things, and we've talking about it as well, because that's the ethos that we're trying to instill across, transformation, anywhere we go or whatever we work on. One is, commitment, clarity of what needs to be done, right? There's clear vision, there's a clear mission, there's a clear purpose. That purpose is social as well, has a pretty strong social impact to it. The second piece was there were no trade-offs needed in the context of this program. Like, you weren't trading off a business initiative for this current program. You were incentivized quite significantly to support the program as much as possible. So all hands on deck essentially was the first thing that I think stepped up. The second piece was, let's not just flood the team with anyone, but let's bring a cross-functional team that really brings the value to this end-to-end to push this from inception to execution as fast as possible. So the subject matter experts, the technologists, the design team, because you had to bridge the pipe of the program's needs with the business requirements to actually take it out end to end, right? And then make sure it was serviced as quickly as possible. And it scaled to the volumes that were needed, particularly the first few days, right? Because it went out and the need, I think there were, I don't have the stats behind me, but it was quite significant, the initial volume of what was needed. I think a lot of it was all of those pieces. It was essentially clear buy-in, clear mandate. You didn't have the trade-offs, and the teams came together really quickly, where it was a small focus team to drive that end-to-end and play it out. And I think those tenets of like, what are you going to measure, how you measure it, and what you're focused on, do one thing and do it well, are key aspects, I think, that really prove this out.
I think another key aspect is I'm sure people were motivated by like, hey, there's a crisis going on and this is how I can help. And there's a lot of purpose behind that.
Absolutely.
I guess I would be, and maybe not in everything you do, that you always have that, but like this was very clear, right? Like there's something bigger we're working on here. That
I think to build on that, there was also the impact of the MVP of the day one. You don't have to do it all up front. Let's get it out there, see if it works, so hats off to the government as well to be able to, push that mindset as they were learning across the board.
Well, if there's one thing government's good at, it's spending money. So,
yeah.
But I think this ties right back to. Sorry if you wanted to go somewhere else, but what Jeff was talking about with OKRs, right? So could you talk a little bit more about how you're rolling those out, or how you're, I don't want to say pushing that, but leading that initiative at JPMorgan? Yeah,
so something I've been truly passionate about, as you both know, is OKRs, right? It's been something that we've worked on together. It's something that organizations are learning more and more about over the last few years. We've, spent time with many organizations on the OKR approach, and a lot of organizations tend to just think about it being a process, but the thought that goes into setting those OKRs, making sure there's safety within the teams to push for those ambitions and really drive that OKR mindset across, and make sure that everything is measurable, but also teams are committing to those OKRs. It's not the organization forcing them to do so. It's something that just takes time, and as organizations are still learning about how to switch the agile mindset around leadership to make that happen. At JPMorgan, OKRs are a pretty significant force in the technology teams in particular. They are, Agile is just a way of working at JPMorgan, and it's fantastic that the technology teams in particular are really driving that ethos. The technology teams have clear funding criteria, are moving into this journey mindset, but are still building products as they speak today. So it's something that is still a work in progress, but I think it's definitely catching fire beyond tech, where we're starting to really unlock where OKRs can really add value. And right now I'm testing a few aspects with our own strategy teams to really drive that. If you could do this one thing, how would you rate the factors on the OKR methodology? How do you actually scale up? What's your 0.7 in essence, and how are you driving that forward? But it's something that I think we're still working towards.
So you had mentioned it earlier, but yeah, still a very big fan of it. And I was thinking back to just one of the probably struggling with how to articulate this, but where I'm going with my thoughts is it's just such a great tool to reinforce your WIP limits, right? Like Jeff brings this up all the time, but just the number of things that an organization is always trying to do at the same time. And it's because oftentimes they've got 20, 40, 100 different backlogs of work. And back to what we were talking about before, all of them are products, right? And so each one of these initiatives is just very slow progress against 100 or so different little initiatives, instead of saying, what's that, 3 to 5 things that we can be going after, focusing and deliberately saying no to the rest of those things. It's not to say those other things aren't important or we don't want to go after them, but we're going to say no for right now. It's a no, not yet type of discussion, and limit what we want to be focused on moving forward. And I've always thought that is probably the biggest thing. Now, you mentioned like the top down, bottom up, right? Teams committing, teams feeling like they have the psychological safety to commit to these things without needing to feel that retribution has come down the line or something like that. So there's more to it than that. But I've always thought that, again, just that the fact that it limits your WIP so specifically and drives that alignment is probably one of the bigger takeaways for me. But I mean, of that, like, what would your thoughts around why OKRs are so beneficial for an organization?
I think a few things. One is, and with prior organizations that I've worked with as well, the key challenge has been at the strategy level, doing a few things, but doing them well, and being very clear on what that mission is and how to quantify that mission, so you can cascade it and align the rest of the organization in that ethos of what you're trying to do. Many organizations tend to do 15, 20, 30 initiatives on an annual basis. And if you align on those, sometimes you have challenges with aligning how to quantify them. Second is, you may quantify one and you may actually oppose another. So it's not mutually exclusive. They're actually opposing forces in those constraints as well. So you really have to be thoughtful on that, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive strategy of what you're trying to do, and then aligning it in the context of how do you cascade it across the organization, and how do you empower the organization to think about how they could measure those. The first piece is teams need to understand the why around that mission. And why is that strategic objective important to our organization today? to organization 18 months, 3 years out? What are you trying to actually do and why, right? The second piece is the what. Like, what are the measures? What are the key indicators that you're looking to move? And then letting the team figure out the how.
Mm-hmm.
And many leaders tend to push to figure out the how as well. And that's where psychological safety is lost. That's where a leader is potentially being too prescriptive. That's where a team is not able to go beyond their current view and their microscopic view in front of them, because they're really trying to figure out how to change whatever the organization's asking for. So the why and the what is key to what leaders need to get better at aligning the organization towards, and letting the how be for the teams that actually can do it, because they're closest to the work. And that is an aspect I've seen more and more leaders actually learn as they go.
I love that, Maneesh. I want to take a step up, because I was thinking about the same thing from a meta level for OKRs.
Yeah.
Because I get asked this question, like, why OKRs? Like, we're already doing Scrum. We're already got agile processes in place. Like, why do we need OKRs too? But for organizational agility, the why is that for OKRs, it's a practice you can use, but the why for it is information flow and rapid decision making.
Yeah.
So we want to favor transparent and rapid decisions and our information flow over, protected and slow information. So a lot of big organizations are like, no, we got to word this just right, and it takes months to actually get the information out to the people doing the work. And we also want decisions to be made by many people over a few people. Because if they have the right information, we want them to make the decision at real time. I just think of that example of there's this article from Chick-fil-A where their credit card machine went down in the airport, and like people had all these orders in, and they just started giving the dinners away for free. They're like, instead of like, oh, I have all this food made and you can't pay for it because our credit card machine doesn't work. Sorry. Like, they're just like, no, you get this stuff for free. Don't worry about it. We're fine. And they just she gave a bunch of stuff away for free. And that's like, and Chick-fil-A was like, yeah, that's exactly how we would want them to handle it. That's how we talk about with our, it's about customer service. It's about satisfaction. It's not all about profit. And so they, we're aligning around their OKRs and their mission and their values. And so I think that same stuff happens every day in every organization. It's like, but how can we accelerate the decision-making and information flow? And OKRs can be a really great practice that can allow us to do that, because now we're making aligned decisions and making all these great micro decisions to move, those objectives forward. But where it comes in, where we have problems with it, or where I've seen organizations struggle with it, is when they lose the why. Just like a lot of Scrum teams lose the why on sprint goals, and they have 5 or more, and now you don't have focus. Well, if you have many OKRs across multiple things that are not all products, and you don't have aligned teams, to Jeff's point, you can't have flow, and your WIP limits aren't going to be there. And so it's not going to feel very different. It's going to feel a lot like maybe KPIs and having tons of them. And it's not going to really feel like we did anything different in our organization. So I think how you do it, and then remembering the why and the what on OKRs is really important as you go through and define the whys and the what of what you're going to do strategically.
Yeah, and also building on the point that Jeff made earlier, it's the thin slice of the organization's objectives as well, right? So it's like the transparency of, why am I trying to do this, and how is the work I'm looking at in the spectrum of work another Scrum team is looking at, a whole tribe is looking at, how is all that affecting the bigger picture? What's that journey orientation to value for the organization, which I think is where OKRs actually really, really matter. I mean, the objective, if it's clear, if they have results that are clearly articulated and measurable and can be aligned to the organization, there's clear transparency end to end, that if you meet a sprint goal or miss it, what the cascading effects are. So everybody can look at their overall objectives and pivot and learn as they go along. Because that's the other thing about OKRs as well. They're not perfect. The organizations have to learn as they go. And just because you set up an objective to be 50% improvement in the first week, where you've not seen it for years on end, you're just not going to see it for years on end. So you really have to be mindful on what the organizations are able to do, and that's where the how really needs to come from the team.
So speaking of which, really quick, what is your Manish's 2 cents on when you're setting your objectives at the top level. More quarterly based, more biannually, more yearly, more even long term than that, maybe a 3 to 5 year objective that you're going. I get that some of this is likely context specific and fit for purpose, but I'd like, with your experience, where do you kind of start with that? Are you thinking more short term, or do you go for a big 1 year objective right out of the gate?
So it's interesting. A few years ago, an organization wanted to set up a new digital business. And we're like, so what's your end goal? It's like, in 10 years, I want to buy Twitter was the end goal. Right? And that was the 10-year horizon. I was like, all right, let's start there. That's great. It's a great objective. Clear result. let's pull back to something a little more contextual, and brought it back to a domain, a segment, an organization, an area that had nothing to do with social media communication. And they were not even in the ballpark. And that was just a random nirvana goal. The mission and the vision is, I think it should be about 3 to 5 years out, because it's not myopic. It forces you to really think about why this matters in the longer term. Sometimes a 3-month, 6-month, 1 year horizon on a strategic organizational objective tends to be very operational. And if you're really looking at moving the needle on an organizational objective, I think it's really important to look a little bit further out. The YouTube example of the billion views is a really good one, right? Because they really thought about it in the long term and started to pull back. Okay, what does that mean for us, going forward? Airbnb has talked about, a hotel on Mars as a 10-star service. I'm not sure that'll change now given where we are, but what does that mean for a 5-star service today, right? If you continue to move that needle. So in that sense, I really think about that goal to be a 3 to 5 year vision, and then starting to pull back and cascading that through, saying, okay, so what do I need to do a year from now, and how will I measure that? What do I need to do 6 months? What do I need to do 3 months? How can I frequently check in on a monthly basis how I'm trending to that key result for that quarterly OKR as I go along? That's where and that's the organization curve of learning that takes time. Yeah, leaders tend to jump into OKRs and make it a lot about the process. And as we work together as well, a lot of the learning with teams to build that psychological safety is key to this. Performance measurement, right? Is how is this going to affect and incentivizing the teams, and making sure that it's a team-based environment, and so on and so forth. How do you really change those behaviors to move the needle?
So one of the topics that we were talking about before we started recording was Agile going mainstream. And you said, well, I think we could have a good discussion around that. So what are your thoughts? Like, there's pros and cons to Agile being a very common word. Pretty much all businesses know what it means now. But what are some of the positive and negatives that you're seeing?
I think firstly, it's fantastic, right? Agile going mainstream is incredible for many reasons. Firstly, the fact that people matter in the world we live in today, right? People are important to an outcome. Outcomes matter, customers matter, responsiveness matters, collaboration matters. All of those Agile manifesto tenets matter, which I think is fantastic. And the fact that has moved has been fascinating and great for pretty much all human beings, because it really affects how people work. I think there are aspects to Agile that, going mainstream, as with anything, the process becomes the silver bullet. Just make this thing Agile. Just put Scrum process on this. Set up a safe foundation. Call it something that sort of has to do with Agile. Maybe call it a Scrum board. Call it a sprint. Call it a Kanban board. Call it a WIP limit with 250 line items in it. And two teams working on it. I've seen it unfortunately. And then you've got to, that's when you step back and you're like, okay, we're actually going through a couple of modes now with this person that I'm speaking to. They've learned about Agile, but they haven't learned about ethos of Agile. And I'm seeing more and more of that happen, where the mainstream agility is creating more noise and signal, and moving into sprint goals have to be met. The what's the difference between the product owner and the coach? Let's make it the same role. Let's not think about the triangle as well, which in the project, the technology, as well as the team, and how all of that flows together. Those kind of things. I think we're missing a little bit of the of Agile going mainstream, and I think that's where the coaches really matter in this construct, to step back and really help people learn the fundamentals, figure out the patterns, and then build on those patterns as we go along. And some great coaches I've met in my time, it's like they spend a lot of time teaching with guardrails, and then slowly removing the guardrails, and then letting the teams just flow. And some coaches I have met, they do exactly the opposite. They lock on the guardrails, and they just don't let the teams work around them. And that's where, as organizations are getting bigger and bigger and embracing agility in terms of frameworks, some of the frameworks create some of this process-heavy mechanisms as well. And I'm just personally wrestling with that and trying to find ways where you always step back to the manifesto, the principles, the reasons why this movement started, which was all about unleashing the guardrails in essence.
Yeah, I was working with an executive recently, and she said something to me where it's kind of striking home here, where she's like, it's pretty easy to change how people work, but changing how they think about the work is really difficult. And that's why I'm glad we have you here. And so it's like, I don't know, I think about this, like, mindsets are really hard to change. Frameworks are easier. Frameworks without mindsets can turn into like this mechanical framework without life that just like is kind of like the zombie Scrum. We talk about that a lot. But building this muscle memory can kind of breathe life into the frameworks and then actually live out that mindset. So I think you have to start with those frameworks, learn how to walk and build up that strength to like have the mindset, and then you get the mindset. But you're right, you have to be able to understand the whys. You have to keep learning the whys. And whoever's your coach or your scrum master has to like constantly be teaching everybody around them the whys, and giving people choices, and not just saying we need to do, I don't know, pick a practice story points because it's required, or we need to use user stories because we need to, things like that. We need to do PI planning quarterly. It's like, well, why do you need to do it quarterly? Like, why couldn't we do it monthly? Like, do we even need to do it? Like, those would be all good questions to ask. And why do we need it?
But that's because the book says so. Why does the book say so in our context?
That's never the right answer. That's what Jeff said in our a couple episodes. If you're ever the Scrum police and you say, well, this is what the Scrum guide says, or this is what, this guide says, that's never a good answer,
Yeah. I think where I've seen COEs as well work really well in that context is taking the Scrum methodology, or the methodology of choice at the time, and orienting it for the organization in the context of the organization. I think the COEs that work really well do that really well. They just understand the ethos. COEs that don't tend to do a lot of you haven't hit your Agile maturity scale is 1 out of 5 because you have a 2-week sprint, not a 8-week sprint, or whatever it is in that organization, which is unfortunate. And that's where the mainstream agility concern continues to affect us. The flip side is, I actually think it's a good thing, right? Because the more people see it, they get a flavor for it, and then they see it done the right way. And the right way really in that context means what works for them in that context, right? It's not, again, by the book, but and that's where really the light bulb goes off, and that's inspirational for me, and that's why the movement's so important.
Yeah, I like what you were just talking about there. With it, everything is so context sensitive. Somebody just put this tweet out not too long ago, and it was something like, every agile coach, there are no such things as good practice or best practices. Also, agile coaches, everybody should be doing DevOps and TDD and CI/CD, right? So there are some things out there that we should be encouraging as coaches and should be part of this agile mindset of really thinking, how does it help us become more responsive and more adaptive? But kind of going back to your guardrails, you mentioned those leaders who just or coaches who just lock teams into those guardrails. Well, the flip side of that is also for some concerns where you've just got leaders who say, well, I'm going to be a good leader, and so there are no guardrails to the team. Well, that just sounds like an excellent way to sink your ship, right? A good leader is understanding the balance between the autonomy that the team gets, the safety of the team, but also the mastery level of the team, right? You don't just throw, Ryan, I shouldn't say his full name. Another product owner I used to work with, I forget exactly how he phrased it, but he's like, you can't just throw a baseball bat and some gloves onto the field and think people are just going to self-organize to play baseball. When they're from, I'm butchering the way he said it, but it was something like, pygmies aren't going to self-organize and figure out how to play baseball from that, right? Like, if you're not used to it, if you've never done this thing before, how can you expect results to come out of that, right? There has to be the right level of guardrails in place, and maybe coaching and teaching and mentoring goes on top of that. But you can't lock people in, and you can't just make them all disappear at the flip of a switch either. So
I completely agree. And I think this goes to the point we were talking about earlier as well around agile leaders. And that is so important. There's a great coach I worked with, Pete Burns. And I don't know if you've ever worked with him or met him, but he's fantastic. Mm-hmm. He does a lot of leadership agility coaching for executives and strategy teams. So it'd be great for us to connect with him at some point, which I'll hopefully connect you with. And essentially, one thing he talks about a lot, which has really resonated with me, is as a leader, your team's on this bus. What are you doing? Are you driving the bus? Are you conducting? Like, what are you doing in that bus? What is a leader doing in that bus? What do you both think? Tough one.
I don't think they're driving because they're not doing the work. They're not the how. They're not actually executing on it. I would say that they're helping to make sure they got the right people on the bus. They're making sure they've got, somebody who can help navigate. They're making sure they've got somebody who, I don't know, what else they need. We need people that can unload the luggage and load the luggage, and we need people that can do whatever else we need to do if we're using a bus analogy here. But we need all the people that can do all the things that we need, and they're making sure they're getting better at their job and they have everything they need and that they know about new possibilities and how to get better. Those would be the things that I'd be thinking a leader would be doing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So what resonated with me is the leader is not on the bus, not driving the bus. The leader's outside navigating, right? Making sure the right people are on the bus. They're being supported wherever they need to be supported, right? Paving the way, right? Showing them where they need to go, but not on the bus. And I think that's been a very critical thing that some leaders forget, because they tend to be, they're not listening, they're not guiding, they tend to be more, they're not understanding what guardrails are ready to be pulled or pushed, right? And what really is the support the team needs, something I think teams, I think there is an aspect of servant leadership as well, because your point of psychological safety is a key thing, right? It's like sometimes leaders have to step in and just support the team figure out the how, because sometimes the teams are looking to figure out the how, and when they ask for that support, stepping in and figuring out the how is actually great, because you're showing that you're serving the team when the team needs you, and you're being that person for that team.
Yeah, so I remember what this was now. It was not just servant leadership is still leadership, but also the mark of a great leader is when you take them away, everything pretty much just keeps going as it was before, right? Yeah. I've heard this from the team needs me, right? I'm the leader of the team. Without me, the team would fall apart. Well, you, sir or ma'am, have failed your team, all right? You are not a great leader. You are the opposite of a great leader, right? The leader is building the team up to be able to make way without them. I think a lot about my time in the military, and all the great leaders that I can think of had that mindset, right? They were still out there, whether there was the battalion commander, the battalion XO, or a company commander. They were telling the why. They were setting the vision out there for it, and had made sure that the training time was put in place so that when it came time to execute, the teams could do so. They had a clear vision, a clear mission, knew what needed to happen, and they just stood back and let the magic happen, right? And you can carry that into business just as easily. But that's, to me, the mindset of a good leader is they're in essence working themselves out of a job, right? They're supporting each other, they're bringing each other, making sure that they're properly trained, they know the why, and then they just stand back, right? They self-select out from that position.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify what you were saying there, Maneesh, and what Jeff was saying. So when I first heard that, I thought, oh, are you saying when it's not going according to plan, the leader could just say, nope, do it exactly this way? And I don't think that's what you meant at all. So I had the example in my head of you're going down the military example, Jeff, where it's David Marquette saying, and turn the ship around, I reserve the right to, press the fire button to shoot, weapons or whatever. If something's going to happen like that, I need that responsibility to fall on me. And so a leader, especially in a product company that we're talking about and working with every day, we were just talking to Rich Sheridan, and he was talking about how hey, we're going to reduce everybody's salary to our base salary pay. That's a decision that I'm making. No one else has to make that decision. And I'm not going to put that out to everybody out there to say, hey, what do we do? Do we lay people off? Do we cut salaries? What do we do? I'm going to make this call because somebody has to make the call. And that's what leadership's about. So I think we're on the same page. I just wanted to clarify. Was that what you meant, Anish, when you were saying?
Yeah,
I think sometimes needs to come and do the how.
I think what I meant was in the context of sometimes leaders need to support with the problem solving, helping bring in their experience, right? Because they may have, to your point on the pay cut example, they may be the only ones who would be able to make the decision and have the context to be able to make the decision. So, and the team is anxious about that decision, but has no control and has no understanding. So pull back. This is an obstacle for the team right now. I'm going to step in and I'm going to help the team out. That to me is that servant leadership perspective as well, is let's work through, if that happens, how do we still support you and everything you need, personally and professionally.
Yeah. So I'll give a real life example. So if let's say that you've got a client or you're working with a team and they find out hey, we're really struggling. We can't get these deployments out. We've got these server groups that are going down and clients aren't getting what they're wanting. Our customers are really upset.
Yeah.
Having a director or a VP come in and say, here, let me fix this problem for you. And they get in there and start coding, not what we're looking for, but them saying, hey, we've spent a lot of time and we've neglected a lot of technical debt over the years. We need to pay that back, and we need to have that be a strategic initiative. We need to have dedicated focused time on that, and we need to pay that off because we can't have this happen again. We need to get to that 9999, uptime again. And so I'll fund that. I will get you time, money, resources, whatever you need to make that happen. That's what I can do as a leader, right? Are we saying the same thing?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's spot on. I think there are examples where, in today's day and age, people are working from home. They don't have the environment to be able to do that today. How can a leader support that? They don't have the training or the tools that they need to really drive productivity as the team would like to. How do they do that? So that's true sense of servant leadership in my mind.
What book is that from? Is it Good to Great? The right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus, and the right people in the right seat. I was trying to remember what that's from.
I believe it's from Good to Great as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, it's definitely Jim Collins that said that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think your point on autonomy, mastery, and purpose is also a Daniel Pink Drive construct, right? That is really super important. But these are really good principles that, again, blend really well with the agile leadership constructs as well. Of how do I bring the best out of my team, get great people to work together, set up great relationships to make great things happen, and step out of the way.
I think actually this is interesting because as you were calling out Jim Collins, Daniel Pink, et cetera, I feel like that agile umbrella is really forcing us to look outside of what we would typically think of as mainstream effective ways of working. And so I maybe I'm just naive to this, but I can't imagine 20 years ago anybody would have sat down and started talking about psychological safety with me or a team that I was looking at. But we were starting to venture into these adjacent realms of, good leadership. What does that actually look like? What is servant leadership? What is psychological safety? What is autonomy, mastery, and purpose? Let alone, what does it mean to technical excellence? What is unit testing? What is good frameworks and architecture and design and all of this stuff, which is still important when we want to build a great product. But I feel like agility has expanded the spectrum of conversation as to what it means to be a great organization. Like, it's no longer just good technical practices. There's EQ, emotional intelligence. There's diversity. There's we can throw a bunch of these words that we're now pretty commonly hearing into the bucket of this is what it means to be a great learning organization, putting out great quality product, et cetera. And I just thought that was kind of interesting as we were talking through these different concepts and ideas that are floating around out there.
Yeah, that's spot on. I think it's like this whole continuous improvement, continuous learning, as a continuous learning organization, what am I going to learn today? Instead of what am I best at today? I think is this, and that mindset, to your point, threads in the EQ, threads in leaders who are not just managing, they're leading through change, through learning, and learning themselves, which I think sometimes leaders are not able or supposed to show that humility, and that really affects the organizations that they're part of.
Yeah, I'm thinking about back to your question, Jeff, like, why is that? Like, why is Agile expanding across all these different chasms? And I think it's probably because there's organizations that they got really good at DevOps, but guess what? They still didn't get the business impact that they were looking for, or they got really good at psychological safety, but you know what? They didn't learn fast enough, and that was another bottleneck. And so it's a combination of all this stuff. And if one of those other things becomes your bottleneck, you're only as strong as your weakest link, and you're only going to be able to go so far. I mean, granted, you can get lucky, but you're fragile in some way, and so to get rid of that fragility, maybe it kind of takes everything.
Yeah,
I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I think it's also the plan, do, check, act sort of cycle, right? The build, measure, learn loop, because you get to a place where what's your hypothesis that you're validating, and that could be in your product space, it could be in your training and retention space, it could be in your talent space, it could be how your organization operating model is set up. Like, what is the hypothesis that you're looking to validate? How are you measuring that hypothesis and validating it? And then how are you actually learning through that? And if you go to that mindset, that to me is the Agile expansion of pretty much everybody is learning and everybody has the best knowledge at that time to do what they were doing, and have learned through that process, which I think is helpful and a really different paradigm for many organizations.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you guys see leaders that are struggling with that, and how are you approaching when they do struggle with that in your coaching?
That's
world?
a Boobles question.
I'd say yes. I think one of the hardest things for leaders is leaving space for the self-organization to happen. They want to jump in and solve the problems. And I think that's one of the big things that I coach them through. Like, they're not at the guardrails yet. Could you help optimize them and solve this problem? Yes. It's like, you could give this person who's hungry a fish, or you could let them be a little hungry and they can try to figure it out tomorrow. And they're going to be a little better and think a little clearer, and so, what damage are we doing if we go in and solve the problem right away? And so but what can we do to help support? What can we give them? And so I think that is a hard thing. And it's just our nature, right? I mean, most leaders got to being leaders by helping solve problems. And now you're saying, don't do it, like support, teach, guide, facilitate. And that's, those are different skills.
Yeah.
And so I do think some people do struggle with that.
I think that's spot on. I think it goes from problem solving business problems to problem solving human problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
that's
really,
actually what I was going to say. Was I would nudge Jeff a little bit further. And granted that a leader could have gotten to that position, excuse me, because they are good at solving problems. But I feel like that's just human nature. Like, we like solving problems. We feel good when we solve the problem, right? In every Scrum Master class, I've got to say, like, that's not your role, right? Your role is to reveal that there's dysfunction, but not resolve the dysfunction for the team. And that's so difficult for people to think, especially leaders, when, like Jeff was saying, that likely that's what got them to that position. But I think it's just as hard for literally every other person, right? Because it is hardwired into us that we like to solve problems. We feel good when we solve problems. I've got my niece now living with me, and I want to jump in and solve problems for her, and I got to keep pulling myself back and say that that's not helping her in the long run. And I'm not a parent. I'm close enough to it that it scares the shit out of me. But that's the other thing I'd like to articulate with. I think, again, good servant leadership is a lot like being a good parent. You're the shepherd, right? You are trying to shepherd somebody on their growth and development, and through the best of intent, with love in your heart. When you solve the problem for them, you are robbing them of that opportunity to learn and grow from that, solving on their own. And I think that's just a natural human instinct to try and jump in and solve the problem for people.
Yeah. And I think as the servant leader mindset, from moving from blame to what did you learn from this experience, I think is a tenet that I've actually seen some leaders struggle with. It's not this person's fault. This person has just learned something new. It's something that I've seen time and time again, unfortunately, which then becomes a moment of where we have to come together and try to figure out how to solve this for that person. Human problem.
Yeah, and leader looking at that systematically and saying, well, why did this happen? Oh, they didn't have the information they needed. Oh, there was actually a lot of delay in the system because they're not organized as a real team. They're just work groups or whatever. There could be so many different issues that can happen. But if you look at the bigger picture and try to solve it systematically, that I think is really valuable. And that's another leader's role.
Sorry, I was just going to say there's a Drucker quote in there, something about 95% of the behaviors through the system.
Denning.
Okay.
Denning, yeah. 95% of problems in organizations come from the system, 5% come from the people within them, or whatever, something along those lines.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And also there's this, the challenge you have is that system is what is role modeled across the organization, because that's how they are expected to, the whole organization is expected to deal with situations, and then are incentivized by that. And then, so you might have diversity in one way, but you don't have diversity of thought and action and perspective, and that becomes a cycle in itself. Have you both seen challenges with the mainstream agility from the teaching, coaching perspective? On the flip side, where you've got coaches who, as the Agile movement has expanded, organizations have learned about it, but also there are more and more coaches. There are more and more frameworks. Have you seen it from the other angle, given your training lens as well as your coaching lens?
So here's how I'm understanding the question. So it's like, have you seen problems with there just being lots of coaches out there, and then maybe not all having, I don't know, enough knowledge, experience in different scenarios where maybe people are getting taught things that are like actually hurting them instead of helping them? I would say definitely yes. And so one of the things that I see is that part of it's the system that we put in place that we were just talking about, and that like if I can get hired as a Scrum Master, great. And now if I can get to be an Agile coach, maybe in 2 years, I want to get there as quickly as I can. I get a nice bump, let's say 10, 20K a year. That's pretty awesome. So I want to do that as fast as I can. And as soon as I find an opportunity where somebody will give me, I've been with one team as a Scrum Master for 6 months or a year. Now I'm an Agile coach. It's like, and these things don't all of a sudden translate that they worked really well with that last team. Do you have enough experience, or should you have been another Scrum Master for another team, a couple different scenarios and been like, okay, I've tried some things, I've lived, I've learned. Or do you just stay as a Scrum Master and then just go, like I always say, you should go not horizontally in the organization, not pick up more teams as a Scrum Master, but go vertically. And if you're a really good Scrum Master, then you should be going up in the organization and saying, hey, HR practices, that's getting in the way. Hey, our budgeting process, that's getting in the way. Yeah. Hey, downstream process, figuring out what the product is in our product strategy, that's getting in our way. Like, let's figure out how to, optimize for the whole entire system. And that's what your Scrum Masters would do. Not many organizations do that, though. They call those people Agile coaches, then enterprise Agile coaches, and then they work up here and people down here do the team stuff, right?
That's the growth model for most organizations as well. You're right.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the problem is that model, right?
There was I literally just tweeted this out a few weeks, well, maybe on our whatever our Twitter handle is. I'm not really good with Twitter, but Jeff lets me run with it regardless. So anyway, the Agile Wire on our Twitter, I was retweeting an old quote from Arlo, and it was something to the effect of, why would we try and do for 200 people what we can't yet properly do with 8? And to that, while he was talking about scaling, the students that I've had coming through our class, in particular the PSM class, and I'm not trying to beat up on anybody. The baseline that a lot of students are coming in with experience is not great. And again, I don't want to beat up and be too harsh with anything, but there's a foundational knowledge that we should be speaking to. And in the PST community, we talk a lot about empiricism, inspection, adaptation, transparency. You talked about Plan, Do, Check Act, or the OODA, Observe, Orient, Decide Act. All of those are basically the same thing, right? The experiment, the hypothesis we're setting up, and the validation that goes inside of it. Now, the Scrum framework sets up and it does that for you, but I'll have students come through that have been a Scrum Master for a few years, and that baseline foundation is lacking and not there. And and these are students that are coming in with certifications through other bodies. And again, I don't want this to be a Coke versus Pepsi conversation, but regardless of where they're getting the knowledge and the understanding from, it is clearly lacking at this point. And then going back to the scaling discussion, you're going to try and throw SAFe on top of that. Well, just expect mountains of garbage built on top of your foundation of garbage. Okay, that's not going to really give you the outcomes that you're looking for. And I think just to what Jeff was saying, like, you've got to embrace the journey, right? Not necessarily the destination. And if we're thinking about really becoming a master at your craft, that's 10 years or 10,000 hours. So, there's somewhere within that. That is a hell of a journey. Right, you can't speed that up. Right, experience and the journey takes time. So, I guess I'm kind of echoing a lot of what Jeff was saying, but I don't want to be completely binary in this as well. There's a lot of great coaches and people who really understand what it means to be coached. And I think Jeff is definitely one of those. The other Jeff, I'm not speaking in third person here. So. Again, not being binary with or trying not to be binary with any of this stuff. So there's good and there's bad, but I think it's just become too easy to earn a certification out there, or in a lot of cases, just be given a certification. And that's for Scrum Masters, that's for coaches, and organizations are relying on these people to be experts in this field. And I think that term coach, the Agile coach, has been overloaded in and of itself. And I think there's some danger inside of that.
Yeah, a CIO and an organization I was working with recently said, is an Agile coach like a rugby coach, like a football coach? And is an Agile, I can't, how do they correlate? Because I think about coach very differently from one organization to the next. And it is partly that problem, which is you're trying to relate, different sports to, the work we do and how coaches are providing that support to really drive that forward. But at the same time, coaches are also being told that given the scaling approach of moving from doing 2 projects as Scrum Master, then you become a coach. You haven't really seen the patterns enough to solve the problems and to provide that expertise to teams. And the learning that a coach needs at that point is to find other coaches in their network, connect with at conferences, connect with other coaches who have the experience. So you can build that 10,000 hours through those conversations. And you build that through your network. And I think some coaches forget that, which has been frustrating and challenging at many levels. So I think it's something maybe with coaches such as yourselves and others as well, I'm really hoping to work with to build that movement of how do we make everyone go from good to great to a point where, yes, okay, they've not had the expertise, but they have the passion for it. They want to learn. They just don't know where and how and what to do with it. And your podcast here is one great example of providing that, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, and that was kind of our goal when we actually created this. We were both working together. We're sitting next to each other, and people had overheard Jeff and I kind of debating some stuff passionately. They're like, "Are you guys okay?" Or like, "You guys gonna start throwing punches?" And we're like, "No, we're just having a conversation. Like, it's fine." And they're like, "Oh, wow, I could just sit here and listen to you guys forever." And so we're like, "Oh, we should maybe record." They're like, "You should record this." And we're like, "Oh yeah, we should record it. Maybe we should make a podcast." And then Jeff did it. Like, he's like, "Let's just do it." So we did it. But you're right. Like, I think coaches, Scrum Masters, like, you have an added responsibility, taking this position to be a continuous learner and show that to your teams. And that one of that could be podcasts. It could be books. It could be, meetups. It could be conferences, whatever it is. There's so much stuff out there. But you need continually learning, every single day. This isn't something you do once in a while. This is an everyday type thing. So I completely agree. I think it's crucial. Like, if you really want to be good at your job or your career, help organizations make a difference, it's what's required.
I completely agree. I think it's and sometimes it's your craft. Sometimes it's contextual to your craft as well. It could be the domain you're in, could be the people you're working with. It could be many of those things. So I completely agree.
Awesome. Well, we're kind of at our time box here. Maneesh, it's been awesome having you on the podcast. Thanks again. Is there anything at this time you want to plug or promote to our listeners?
No, I think firstly I want to say thank you again for having me on. It's been a fantastic conversation. It felt like a conversation end to end, and really it's been great. Gave me something to reflect on as well. And I think the thing I would probably end with is the conversation we just had, which is how do we just collectively bring more people to continuously learn and share their experiences and on channels like these and elsewhere. So thank you for that.
Awesome.